Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining for us for today's program. Today we are joined with Cliff Matias from the Red Hawk Native American Arts Council, and I'd like to turn the floor over to
All right, thank you everyone. I'm here for Native American Heritage Month, share with you a little bit about Indigenous people, especially from New Jersey. This headdress that I'm wearing is not my traditional headdress, but this is a Eastern Woodland style headdress. The Lenape people, Iroquois people, and many different tribes in the east, northeast, and even in the southeast wear these headdresses. The Iroquois name of these headdresses is called a Gastowa. And so that's the traditional Iroquois name. Iroquois people tell themselves apart by these Gastowas, and I'll talk a little bit about headdresses later. So November is Native American Heritage Month, and it is a time, a month that was designated by President Bush to acknowledge Indigenous people. And so all the accomplishments that Native people have made to America, and to acknowledge our history, traditions, and culture. And so, we always question if it was picked November because of the connection to Thanksgiving, something that more and more Indigenous people are trying to separate themselves from. Because, if we really think about the true meaning of Thanksgiving, it has nothing to do with Wampanoags, that's the name of the tribe, they don't call themselves Indians, the Wampanoags and the Puritans. Nothing to do with that. Abraham Lincoln created Thanksgiving during the Civil War, a general day for all Americans to come together and give thanks. He wasn't thinking about pilgrims, wasn't thinking about Wampanoags, wasn't thinking about that story of them all sitting down and having a meal together. He was thinking about Americans coming together. And that's really what Thanksgiving is. Native Americans, each tribe, each nation has dozens of Thanksgivings that they give throughout the year. The changing of seasons, we call them the solstices. We have Strawberry Fest and green corn ceremony and deer dance and buffalo dance and so many different dances that celebrate, and traditions that celebrate giving thanks. We give thanks to the water, we give thanks to the sky, we give thanks, of course, to the land, to the creatures that sustain us. So giving thanks is a huge part of how Indigenous people navigate their lives. Even today, we give thanks to each other in certain ways. We call them giveaways, where we honor someone and give them gifts and sing songs for them during our celebrations and our gatherings. So giving thanks is huge amongst Indigenous people. So is that story about Thanksgiving true? Well, there's a couple different twists to it. There's one that talks about the Puritans landing in what we know today as Massachusetts. It wasn't that place, Plymouth Rock. The Wampanoags actually know the exact place where the Puritans landed. But it was in the present day village, at the time it was the present day village of Patuxent. Patuxent was a village that the Wampanoags had, and all the people had died from diseases that Europeans who had been fishing off the coast of Massachusetts for years had brought. They had actually captured a man called Tisquantum and brought him back to Europe and sold him into slavery. And so Tisquantum escaped, and when he made his way back to Massachusetts, he got to his village and noticed that there was no one there. Everyone was dead, died from either smallpox or whooping cough, whatever diseases that the Europeans had brought. And so, but he spoke English, and he moved into the neighboring tribe of Wampanoags, the neighboring band. And so when the Puritans arrived, he's already spoke English, and they sent him there to see what they were doing, maybe help them survive. They were dying, and they didn't know how to build homes there. They didn't know how to work the land. So their first feast, where they were able to actually have a crop and harvest it, it is believed they had a harvest ceremony. And about 50 Wampanoag men came, they heard the muskets firing, and they wanted to know what was going on. They realized that they were having a feast, and they brought some deer. They say about 50 men, and they watched the pilgrims wrestle and shoot muskets and drink ale, much different than the giving thanks ceremonies that Wampanoag people have. But nonetheless, they thought that the Puritans could be adopted and live a life as Wampanoags. Of course, the Puritans had their own ideas, and a war quickly developed between the Wampanoags and the Puritans, a war that lasted 50 years. They call it the King Philip Wars, which decimated the Wampanoags to almost 3/4 of their population were wiped out from disease and warfare that the Puritans brought. So for the Wampanoags today, the day of Thanksgiving has a completely different meaning. They fast during Thanksgiving. They have a mourning ceremony because for them, there really wasn't a Thanksgiving for their ancestors. There was never a second, third, or fourth. So, that's one story that's often told by the Wampanoags. Another story of giving thanks, of a celebration that happened for many years, was the village of Plymouth found a man dead in a boat, and they assumed that he was killed by the Pequot tribe, a neighboring tribe to the Wampanoags in Connecticut. And so they sent a huge war party to the village, the Pequot village, and massacred all the inhabitants of that. And so they say between 500 and 800 Pequots perished on that night. And when they returned back to their village, the Puritans, there was a giant celebration because they thought it was a gift from God, like a blessing, a thanks, and they had a Thanksgiving celebration, and which lasted 100 years. Every year on that date, there would be a celebration. So some people say that might have been the origins of the Thanksgiving. Not really sure, but we do know that Abraham Lincoln wasn't thinking about any of those days, and he thought about Americans coming together. Native Americans, we are Americans, even though we're older than America. We have been here longer than America has been. Well, this place has been called America. We called it Turtle Island. But for the most part, we celebrate as Americans. And so many of us do celebrate Thanksgiving thinking the way that Americans do. Many Native Americans don't celebrate Thanksgiving and remembering those stories. So, Thanksgiving is a tender discussion amongst Indigenous people. As many holidays that Americans celebrate, Columbus Day, a perfect example, where Native Americans sort of want to erase the idea that Columbus discovered America, because actually he never did. He never landed in North America. And then we say he discovered a place, but you really can't discover a place that millions of people already inhabited. So when you say Columbus discovered America, it's kind of like you're erasing the fact that millions of indigenous people lived in this hemisphere. But then there is the simple fact that Columbus never set foot in North America. So, Columbus Day in many cities and states around the country has been changed to Indigenous Peoples Day. The city of San Francisco, the city of Los Angeles, the entire state of Vermont, Albuquerque, New Mexico, Seattle, Portland, Oregon, many cities have changed to Indigenous Peoples Day. So it's an interesting discussion. Here in the Northeast, in New Jersey, there are the Lenape tribes that are here. There is the Ramapo Lenape and the Nanacoke Lenape and the Sand Hill Lenape. So there are 3 Lenape bands that are recognized, state recognized here in New Jersey. If you move into New York, you have the Iroquois nations in upstate New York, and Long Island you have the Montauk and the Shinnecock and the Puspatuck. You also have the Schaghticoke First Nations further north in Kent, New York. So there are various tribes and nations of people here in New York and New Jersey, in the Northeast. So I'm going to share with you a little bit of some of the different traditions, maybe break a few stereotypes. This is the drum, and this is the type of instrument that Native Americans use for our songs and dances. This is a plain style drum. I'll share with you the Eastern Woodland style drum in a minute, but I want to tell you a little bit about the circle of the drum, and both drums are a circle. So the circle of the drum represents the earth, and we say that represents the earth, and the heartbeat of the drum is the beat. So we dance and sing to the heartbeat of Mother Earth. Sometimes it's fast, sometimes it's slow, but it's the heartbeat of Mother Earth that we sing and dance to. Now, if you watch TV and movies and have heard this, if you've heard that and watched TV and movies, Native American people do not dance and sing to that. It's made up in the movies. Remember, your heart doesn't sound like this. So no, we don't dance and sing to that, made up in the movies. Let's break some stereotypes. Woo, people often hear that sound and think of Native Americans. It's just made up in movies. We don't even know how that got started, probably in Hollywood somewhere. If someone goes up and says, how, we say we have no idea. Those are things we call stereotypes. And probably the most important stereotype that indigenous people wish to break is the idea that we are happy to be used as mascots. So the Braves, the Indians, the Redskins, the Chiefs, all the uses of indigenous people as mascots is highly racist, and it does affect Native Americans. So we're happy to hear that many sports teams are changing. The Washington Redskins are now changing their name. Many other sports teams and college teams and schools have removed the mascots. And that's important because we always must remember that human beings are never mascots for games and fun. We are not. And it brings me to this headdress, which I have out here. And so, this is probably the most popular headdress that people see right away. They think of Native Americans. But the fact is that indigenous people, Native American people here in New Jersey never use these headdresses. They probably never saw one before. These come from the plains, northern plains, southern plains. This is not a real war bonnet because it would be eagle feathers, but I use this as an example to show people. These war bonnets, depending what tribe you are quite different. So it depends. You could look at a war bonnet and tell which tribe a person is if you really know about these headdresses. Do only chiefs wear them? No. They can be given to an honored person in your community. Sometimes children are honored with the right to wear a war bonnet. But this is a highly religious, for lack of a better term, spiritual item, object. And so, when we see people wearing them and during Halloween or sometimes dancing around or taking pictures, it's very offensive because these headdresses do represent something very special to the people of the plains. But again, indigenous people from right here in New Jersey, they probably never saw one of these headdresses back in the old days. We call this a war bonnet, and we'll put that away. But this is the type of headdress that Eastern Woodlands people use, as I showed you before. And these feathers are peeled. They call it peeling the feathers, and you strip them down, and they create a little swirl. And so on this headdress are hawk, turkey, white turkey, and wild turkey feathers that are on this headdress. Another type of headdress that are used here in the Northeast is called a ropesha. And these small ropeshas would sit on the back of their heads. They have a few purposes. One is to make yourself look bigger, more fierce. The way a bear or a lion or even your dog or a cat might have hair stand up in their back when they're scared or they're trying to frighten you. Their hair stands up. So the men would wear these on the back of their heads to sort of create that same feeling, These are made out of porcupine hair, not quills, hair, and deer hair. Porcupine quills are something much different. They're the original beadwork. So other than wampum, you can see these wampum beads here that are made from shells. But other than wampum, beads came from Europe. So a lot of people think Native Americans might have invented beads, but they don't. So you can see on this this buckskin dress, there's beadwork here, and these beads came from Europe. So Native Americans would trade for beads. When Europeans first arrived, Native Americans were wearing clothing made out of leather, similar to the shirt in the back. But then as they began trading with Europeans, they began getting fabrics and shirts. So these puffy shirts are the styled shirts that the colonial people wore in the 16 and 1700s. And Native Americans, when they celebrate, when they dance and they sing, or they go into ceremony, they often still wear these styled shirts with the puffiness. But if you go to a Native American reservation, you're not going to see people dressed like this. They dress pretty much like everyone else. So it's important to remember. But this dress is colonial. And you can see some beadwork here. So Native Americans have become master beaders, even though beadwork comes from Europe. These are Czechoslovakian seed beads. So before that time, Native Americans used wampum and the shell. So if you go to the ocean, you find a shell that has purple and white. That is what they would make the wampum out of. And they also used quills. So this is like a porcupine quill, if you could see it. And what it is that each little piece is flattened. The quill of the porcupine is flattened. And then it's folded over in a very special way. And then once they're all folded, they're dyed. And so this is a medicine wheel, and these are all porcupine quills. So this is like the original beadwork before Native Americans traded with Europeans and got beads. So that's how, the many parts of our dress, of our what we call our regalia, changed as Europeans came here. There's you know what? Let me show you this dress. Bear with me 1 second. So this is a jingle dress, and this is a perfect example of how things would change. If you look on this dress, there's these little cones, and these are the lids of cans. But when these dresses were first created, they probably were shells or deer toes on the dress. Now the story of that dress is that a man had a vision of 4 women dancing to the sound of rain. His granddaughter was sick, and as she danced, as the 4 women danced, they prayed for that young sick girl and helped her to get better. And so when he woke in the morning, his wife and himself made 4 of these dresses. So that's how jingle dress dancing was created in the Great Lakes region of the United States. You could see that the deer toes and the shells that were originally on these dresses were eventually replaced by the lids of cans and rolled up. So again, that's another way that Native Americans began to change the way they lived or functioned by contact with Europeans. Today, Native Americans use lots of stuff. We're not opposed to using technology. We're not opposed to incorporating things into our traditions and culture that make them better, that allow us to again, embellish our traditions and culture in a good, positive way. Perfect example. When Europeans first arrived, Native Americans were using axes like this, rocks with a stick in it. This was pretty much the standard material. Then Europeans came and they began creating objects to trade, which really disrupted the way that Native Americans lived. But nonetheless, they began creating axes in Europe. And this one actually has a turtle shape, to signify the story of the earth being formed on the back of a turtle, which is the Lenape story. And so this actually could smoke out of too. So Europeans began trading these axes with Native Americans. And what would they trade for? They would trade for furs, otter and beaver fur mostly. And, that really disrupted the way that Native Americans lived, because for the most part, they did not hunt the land, overhunt the land, overuse the land. But when Europeans arrived, Native Americans realized that if they trapped as many beaver and otters they can get wealth in the form of weapons and tools that they traded with Europeans. And so these tools are just one of the examples of how Native Americans began to trap the land and exhaust the resources. And eventually, when the beaver and otter were trapped in their area, they would move into another area, and it really began to disrupt the way that Native people lived. Because before that time, there really was no such thing as wealth. Everyone had what everyone else had. If you made a rattle like this, well, your friend could probably make one too, or maybe you were better at making rattles this way, but someone was better at making rattles out of birch bark, and you could trade. But eventually, all that got disrupted. So being that we do have these rattles, I can share some of them with you. This is a birch bark rattle. This is an Eastern Woodland style rattle, and it's just made from birch bark. Put some seeds in it or pebbles, and you have a birch bark rattle. This is a rattle made out of an antler or a horn, maybe a cow horn or bull horn, a little more subtle. This is a gourd rattle, and gourd rattles are made out of dried fruit or vegetables, and then you dry it out. You put the seeds back inside, and next thing you have a gourd rattle. And I have another rattle here, if I can find it, which is made out of a turtle, and this is a turtle rattle. So after you had made the turtle soup, you wouldn't waste any part of the turtle, and you could use this these turtle rattles. Now these objects are all modern. These are artists have made them recently. It's not something that's old. Native Americans still use many of the process that our ancestors did. We might use some modern things, but we still will make rattles in a very similar way as to our ancestors, just so we pass down that tradition. The story of the turtle is an Iroquois story. I'll tell you a quick part of it. The earth, there was a great flood, and all the animals sat on the back of a turtle. They were told that if they could swim to the bottom of the ocean and bring up some earth and put it on the back of the turtle, that it would form a landmass. So the different creatures tried until the little muskrat, no one could do it. All the animals tried, none of them were successful until the little tiny muskrat said he could do it, and they all laughed at him. But he swam down and he came up, and everyone waited and waited, and they just saw this little hand come up. They thought he drowned, but that little hand came up with the earth in it, and then that's what we call the back of the earth as Turtle Island. And that's one of the reasons why the turtle symbol is so important to Eastern Woodlands people. So this is the turtle rattle. So this is some of the different rattles. Now I told you a little bit about the drum, that the skin drum, and so this skin drum is the type of drum that Native people use. Today it's sort of cross-cultural. It doesn't matter where you're from. We will utilize a drum like this. But traditionally, Native Americans in the East use these types of drums. We call these water drums. It's filled with water. The hide is stretched over, and it's a hollow piece of wood. And we use the stick. And it makes quite a different sound. There's actually a plug for the water to drain out. And this is called the water drum. You can see these Eastern Woodland style designs on it. This is a skin drum. And this is like a northern, southern plains style drum. People from the South, Southern Plains, Native people kind of sing deep in baritone, so their songs might be, oh, yo, yo, oh, yo, oh, oh, yo, so you can see how baritone it is. And then people in the Northern Plains sing high. I'm not really good at singing high, but I'll just give you some sort of idea. So there's a vast difference in the singing styles and traditions of Native people from all over the hemisphere, not just North America. And then here in the Northeast, Lenape or Iroquois, they would sing a different style. Ayawani ho, ayawani ho, we ayo, ayo, ayo. in the middle of it. Now, you have Native people from the Southwest that sing their own style, Native people from Canada, Native people from Alaska, Inuit people, Native people as far west as Hawaii and American Samoa, Native people in Mexico, South America, and the Caribbean. So you're talking about a vast array of indigenous cultures and traditions from all across this hemisphere. Native America is not just the United States. There are actually more Native Americans in Mexico and in Canada than there are in the United States. But we never really had borders, so we never separated ourselves by borders or by geographical zones. We shared and traded with each other. That's why they found trade objects from Mexico, as from the Aztec as far north as the Dakotas, because indigenous people, there really was no borders. We traded with each other, although each tribe did have a land where they lived on and took care of. But it was a much different mindset than what the modern world has today. So a little bit of that. Let's see what else. I have another instrument with me I can share with you. This is called the cedar flute. We also call this the love flute. So a long time ago, there was a young man. He was in love with a beautiful maiden. And every day he would go down to see her, but he was too shy to speak to her. And so he asked his grandfather, he said, "Grandfather, how can I get that beautiful maiden to notice me?" And grandfather thought, I'm going to think about you tonight. So that night, grandfather went to sleep. He dreamt of a cedar tree. And on the branch of that cedar tree, a woodpecker was pecking holes. That woodpecker pecked 6 holes in a straight line. Some wind blew into those holes, and a beautiful sound came out that all the birds of the forest began to sit and listen to. The next morning, grandfather woke up. He looked outside his lodge. He saw the same tree as in his dream. And he looked at that tree and noticed 6 holes. He said, "My brother tree, tell me about these holes." The tree said, "Grandfather, one is for Mother Earth. We always must remember her. One is for the 4 directions. One is for the 4 seasons. One is for the 4 things that grow, the root, the stem, the leaf, the fruit of a tree. One is for the 4 creatures of the earth, those that swim, those that fly, those that walk, those that crawl. And this last one, grandfather, is for your heart, because you're kind and you always think of others." Grandfather was so thankful for that story. He said, "My brother the tree, can I have this branch for my grandson?" And the tree said yes. And so grandfather took that branch and he carved it all day to look like the woodpecker was still sitting on it. He said, "Grandson, take this flute, play it for that maiden. She's going to love you forever." And he said, "But I don't know what to do with such an instrument." He said, "Just place it to your lips and your breath will make beautiful music." And so he did. And grandfather said, "No, you have to think about her first in your heart and in your head." So that night when the stars and moon were out and he saw that beautiful maiden, he took this flute and he played her a song from his heart. And that is the Cedar Flute song. So Native American men today, we still play those flutes for our loved ones. And if you want a woman to fall in love with you, you play her flute. It might work. So I'm going to open up the floor to some questions if anyone has any.
Yes, I have two questions.
Okay.
One, could you tell me a little bit more about the green corn ceremony?
The green corn ceremony?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, different tribes, because corn is a staple of Native American food. They're the three sisters, the corn, squash, and beans, so each tribe has their own ceremony where they give thanks to the corn. So they call it green corn ceremony. It's right before harvest. Most of the time it's in like late September, October, depending where you are.
Thank you. And then the second question is, do you have any reading material suggestions for our viewers today?
There is, let me think. There's a really good kind of booklet called Rediscovering Columbus. And it's a good read. It kind of tells a little bit about, rethinking. Actually, it's called Rethinking Columbus. I'm sorry. Rethinking Columbus. Yeah. Rethinking Columbus. And it really gives you a different perspective as to, what we teach and what young people learn today about the discovery of America, which is a kind of a sore spot for many Native Americans because, often if we say we discovered something, then we're not acknowledging that people already lived there. So I can't walk into your library and say I discovered it. Right,
right, exactly.
So maybe people kind of feel that same way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, so that's all of the questions that I have for today.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for allowing me to share some of our culture and Native American Heritage Month with you. And we'll use the Lenape way of saying thank you. We're going to say Wanishi, which means thank you. So Wanishi to all of you, and to honor the Lenape on their original homeland. So we say Wanishi. Thank you.
And thank you. And it was a pleasure having you today.
Great. Thank you so much.
Of course.